Let your curiosity rise.
Matrix webcast,
Where the human spirit flies. Matrix webcast. Where the human spirit flies.
Hello, welcome to the MedBix webcast. This is Raman Annamaraju. I'm the host. We have a very interesting guest today. Really excited about to talking with him. But before that, let me bring my co-host, Dr. Susan Davis, joining from Fort Myers, and she is a constant, support for me for the MedBix webcast. Let me welcome, Susan.
Hey,
Welcome to the
Ramana.
MedBix webcast.
Thank you
I
so
am
very
in-
much. Good evening.
I'm in one of the richest neighborhood in the world. It's called Los Gatos in Silicon Valley. I'm broadcasting from there.
Yes.
I'm not rich, but the neighborhood is very rich place here. I interviewed.
We are rich in our relationships, Ramana. We are rich in our relationships.
Yes. So because I interviewed last week, last Friday, we interviewed, he lives around here, Dr. Kanwal Rekhi. So I came to see him, and then I happened to be here. So this is a Keller Williams office, and my friend, he works here. So that's why I'm here. But anyway, this is a welcome to the MedBix webcast. What is going on with you? You were in an island or something, is not anything to do with the bad things, right? When you
No,
said-
I don't think being on a remote island could be associated with any bad things. It's some about neuroplasticity and bouncing back from a lot of work, and yet I think what they call it ocean therapy. I think our guest this evening would have something to say about that. It's good for the brains.
Yes. Let me, when you talk about guest, let us introduce him. Dr. Bobby Kasthuri, Narayanan Kasthuri, his real name is from South India, like me. He is he is probably born here, but his parents and diaspora is from there. And then he is a MD, like every Indian. Either they want to be engineer or doctor. He became a doctor. then I don't know what happened. We will ask him. Then he left the practice. He's not seeing patients, and then he went into neuroscience. Very exciting field of neuroscience, particularly a University of Chicago, one of the prestigious schools in the world about neuroscience. They made excellent breakthroughs in the neuroscience. They have a Nobel Prize winners there from that neuroscience department, and also they have and he works on one of the powerful things. People ask him about Argonne National Laboratories. They discovered a very wonderful drugs for the AIDS and in Genovia, diabetic drug, melanoma drug. That is a Zelboraf or some of the drug like that, and they discovered through Argonne National Laboratory. This is one of the most powerful computer. Let us welcome Dr. Bobby Kasthuri. Welcome to the MedBix webcast, sir. Welcome, sir.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me. Hello.
Hello. Yes. Just take us to a journey through your this journey. I was telling you, you're from being a doctor and then went into neuroscience. Take us through the journey, through the process so far here.
Yeah. So just a small correction. I was born in India. I was born in a tiny little town called Kunur, India, near the mountains in South India. But I grew up most of my life in New Jersey. So when people ask me, I think the right answer is New Jersey, not as much as India. But even in high school, I had sort of become interested in both science and the brain itself. I have an aunt who's a neurologist, so I would hear her talk about the brain. So when I started college, I was interested in neuroscience, and I was interested in sort of understanding the brain. I had a brief, I think as everybody does, I flirted with a bunch of other things, hedge funds and finance, out to teaching. But ultimately at the end of college, I decided to go to medical school. There, the idea was to sort of deal with neuroscience, but not as somebody who does basic neuroscience, but as a neurologist or a psychiatrist or a neurosurgeon, somebody who worked in the clinical arena of science.
So now you're associate professor, right? So
Yes.
then in University of Chicago. So you're one of the things is that what is the you do a first thing and foremost first job is that mapping the brain, right? That is the
Yes.
biggest thing you do. Tell us what is the mapping the brain means to our audience, even the
Yes.
educated people. Just give us some background, sir.
Yes. So I think for most of my time here at the university, but even before in graduate school and for a postdoc, a set of neuroscientists have been working on this idea, which is to make the map of what we call the connectome of a brain. And so let me describe that to you a little bit. One way to say it is that in your brain, in a human brain, we think there's something like 100 billion brain cells. We call them neurons. These are the cells that process information, that are the basis of our thoughts. They're the ones that move our bodies around, and they're all here found, encased in our skull. And those 100 billion neurons in your brain, what makes them special, what makes them different than any other cell in your body, different than a skin cell or a stomach cell or a kidney or a liver cell, is that these cells, these brain cells, these neurons send out parts of themselves, processes, to make very specific connections with other neurons in the brain. And sometimes those other neurons in the brain are on the opposite side of the brain. And as best as we can estimate, we think every neuron in the brain, give or take, makes something like 10,000 connections with other neurons. The first thing to say is that's a pretty small number. That's 10,000 out of, remember I said 100 billion. So it's a very sparse and very specific who they connect with. But if you multiply all those numbers together, 100 billion neurons times 10,000 connections, you get something like a quadrillion connections. And the number of quadrillion is a very hard number for anyone to understand. So when I try to talk to students about it, I say that's the same as 10 Milky Way galaxies of stars. So every human skull, every human brain contains 10 Milky Ways of connections. And the strong hypothesis, the strong idea in neuroscience is that that specific map of connections that's in Susan's brain, that's different than in yours brain, Ramana, and that's different than in my brain, contains almost everything about you. That means every memory is stored in that map, every hope, every dream, every ability, every skill, every fear, everything that makes you a human being and that makes us humans is found in that pattern of connections. And so the goal of my lab, the goal of many labs in the world, is to try to make that map. And I'd be happy to tell you why we think that would be important.
Yeah, because that's right. Ultimately, there's a massive amount of biology there to figure out. And so once you figure it out, which I'd like to hear about how that's going, because I know mapping a fly brain versus a mouse versus a human is a big jump. But then what are we going to do with it?
Yeah, so maybe we could start with what can we do with it, and then we could work our way back to how do we do it. So let's say it's possible that someday, and a lot of times people call these things digital twins, we will have a digital twin of a human brain inside a computer. And by a twin, I mean literally one of these nanoscale maps where every neuron and every connection, who it makes with and who it receives with, is mapped and stored inside a computer. I think very soon after you do that, you will be able to turn on that computer and simulate that brain. And when you simulate that brain, you make those neurons fire like they would in the real world. You will have taken many of the abilities of brains, the cognitive functions of brains, and put them inside that computer. And I think at least two fundamental transformations of society will happen at that moment. The first is, for the first time, and it might not take an entire brain, but let's assume we have the entire brain. For the first time, we're going to understand the physical basis of mental illness, psychiatric illnesses, possibly neurodegenerative disorders, neurodevelopmental disorders, autism spectrum disorders. And the amazing thing about neuroscience is that we know there must be a physical basis for these disorders. We know they have to, live in the real world and have to do something to do with disruptions with neurons. And we have a very strong impression, hypothesis that for many of these mental disorders, it's the pattern of connections that's disrupted. So if you don't have a normal pattern of connections, you may have a variant of schizophrenia, or if you don't develop the normal pattern of connections, that's autism or autism spectrum disorders. And so for the first time, for many diseases, maybe all these mental diseases, will know their physical basis. And that, for the first time, will allow us, I hope, to treat mental illness in a top-down fashion. Right now, a lot of our therapies for our mental illness are sort of ad hoc. Somebody is on asthma medication, and we notice that their mood improves. So now we have a mood improvement drug. And it's not because we arrived at it because we understand the brain. It's because of happenstance and luck and chance. So I think that's the first thing. I'm hoping we could fundamentally transform mental illness. And I might add, we might fundamentally transform how we treat it. Because once we have a brain in silico that's simulated and functioning, we may be able to test drugs on that brain virtually. And then we may be able to test combinations of drugs that humans would never think of, that the AI is going to tell us what is the best path to treat that digital brain. And once the AI tells us what's the best path to treat that digital brain, we'll take those lessons into the real world and hopefully speed up our process of treating mental illnesses, which you probably know.
Oh,
I'm back.
Yeah.
there he
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
I'm like, you
You're
can't go now. The stories are good.
And so, sorry, I think I was saying, and we need help treating mental illnesses. It has the highest failure rate of any drug for any organ. So of all the organs we treat, the failure rates for drugs for the brain are over 90%. And a lot of that is because I would argue pharma and biotech, they're flying blind. A lot of those are diseases of circuits, and no one's ever seen a circuit before. I didn't mean to interrupt earlier.
Dr. Kasthuri, but the problem is that you're trying to map it out. Brain is 10 galaxies, said that, right? Billions of stars inside, right?
Yes.
So billions of neurons, that connections. How complex it is to mapping in the computer with the limited resources we have, the computers we have. Tell us a little bit, what are the computers you have, the power of computers you have. Now,
Right.
just let us touch the subject of the computational aspect of it.
Yeah, great question. So there's multiple aspects of the computational aspect of it, and the human brain is going to be such an incredible computational task that before I even get to that, let me start with a smaller brain, the mouse brain, the common mouse brain, and the mouse brain is pretty important because it is the workhorse of biology and neuroscience. Many of the diseases that humans have, we have replicated those diseases in mice. They're called mouse animal models of disease. And so lots of drugs are tested and work. So we think before we even get to the human brain, we would love to map the mouse brain because we think that'll be a huge contribution to neuroscience broadly. So let me there are multiple computational things to talk about, but first let's talk about the data. How much data would a mouse brain be? And at the resolution that you need to map all of these connections, I think a mouse brain is something called an exabyte of data, but that might not be a familiar term for people. So let me back it out. An exabyte is 1,000 petabytes of data. A petabyte is which is 1,000,000 terabytes of data, which is 1 billion gigabytes of data. So we would be so one of the things we want to collect. And the human brain is 1,000 times more data than that. So just so you know, so our first target is called an exabyte of data.
Not only the quadrillion operations it does, right? A quadrillion the operations per second. Yeah, go ahead.
Yep, you're absolutely right. I'm going to get there. But just to give you a concept of what an exabyte of data is if you collected, let's say, just for the sake of argument, let's say the Library of Congress, the building in the Washington, D.C., is to some first approximation, the sum of all most of human knowledge is there. The books, the audio, the radio, more recently, the video, the film, etc. This one mouse brain will be probably 10 times, that will be the equivalent of 10 libraries of Congresses. So it sounds like a lot of data, but it's not more data than, for example, Tesla analyzes probably on a daily or a weekly basis. So the world exists of this kind of data. Now, to simulate that, we probably could be done with existing computers at places like Argonne or places like Google that have these massive computers. But everything about the human brain is 1,000 times bigger than what I said. So that's a new term. That's 1,000 exabytes. That's a new term called a zettabyte. And the human brain is probably a couple of zettabytes of data. That will be at a level that humans have never done before. First, the exabyte will be at a level that humans have never done before. But something that's moving in our favor is that the ability to compute is only increasing. Moore's law, that you may have heard of, is only continuing. And there are new kinds of computers on the horizon, quantum computers, biologically based computers, that we think will accelerate that process. But I think a fair answer to your question is, Bobby, could you please point out the computer today that is going to simulate the human brain? And the answer is going to be no. I can't. But I believe it's on the path, not just for human brains, but all of the world is moving towards computing these enormous data sets and understanding them. And maybe we'd have to build our own data centers to wind up mapping the human brain. And I suspect that's what we'll do.
Wow. Where are these, or what would be the equivalent? What are you working with now? If we don't have that type of computer now, what are you working with now? And are the United States, or where in the world do these types of computers exist?
Yeah, so I think we don't work on we don't build computers. We leave that to people who are closer to Ramana now on the West Coast, I think, and also people who are building quantum computers. That does happen at UChicago, just not in my lab. So they exist. What we work on is actually a separate problem that we have, which is that right now our microscopes, and so we have to image these things at the nanoscale. Right now, our microscopes are way too slow and way too expensive to even map a mouse brain. So if you took the world's fastest electron microscope today, it might take like 70 years to map a single mouse brain, or $700 million if you could collect enough microscopes to map it in a year. So the human brain is just 1,000-fold worse, I said. So the human brain would be 70,000 years to map, which I think ironically is longer than humans have existed as a species, or $700 billion to buy enough microscopes to map it. And the current goal of my lab is we figured out a way to reduce that, increase the speed of that process and decrease the cost of that process, hopefully by 1,000-fold. So that for the first time, we could actually, even if we can't yet analyze the data, we could collect that data set. And that's what we're focusing on now.
And is that the PEEM?
Yes, that's the microscope that we've been working on, the photo emission electron microscope. These microscopes have existed for decades in physics labs and chemistry labs, and we're optimizing them and creating new generations of them to map brains instead.
Dr. Kasthuri, you appeared on a PBS series, Your Brain. That's a fascinating thing I saw. The first time I was I saw you there. And one of the things he said that it was very fascinating to me was that brain amazingly filters 99% of reality. We don't know what is exactly, it filters so much. It gives us that astonishing aspect of the illusion the brain creates.
Yes. I mean, somebody was just asking me this, what is the circuit that I'm most interested in discovering? Is it the circuit for like how we see red, or is it the circuit for our morality? Is it the circuit, like what is the thing which circuit, when we discover it, am I going to be most interested in? And I don't have an answer. Like, I don't have a favorite thing that humans do. Sometimes I think it's sense of humor. Like I like if there must be a physical basis for what makes one person funny and another person not funny, or one person appreciate humor and another person not. That's the one. I think that's my personal favorite. But I think what's going to be shocking for people when we ultimately understand the brain is how much of the circuitry is built in to deceive us. And so not just to deceive other human beings. I think there's going to be a lot of circuits devoted to deceiving, but I think even more of those circuits are built to deceive ourselves. And let me try to explain. I have two kinds of experiments that I always think about. The first is, it's just, we now know based on the eye that there's a part of our retina, the part of our eye that sees, that at any moment we look at space, there's a huge blind spot. There's a huge black spot in the middle of our visual field. And there are little tricks you can go online that force you to focus your eye on something, and you will see that blind spot appear. But the reason, and it's just part of our visual experience. Everything we look at in the world has this blind spot in it. And we never see it because what the eye does is it moves around so fast, it backfills that information. So even though there is a blind spot in our visual field, in the real world, we never experience it because our brains fill in the information by the time it comes from our eye back into our visual system. So it's just fundamentally set up to filter and change our senses for a particular view of the world that we're expecting. That's the simple kind of experiment. The deeper experiment that I think about a lot, especially in these days, is one of the great neuroscientists in the world is I think he's passed away. He won the Nobel Prize. He must have passed away. His name is Roger Sperry. If anybody wants to look him up. And one of the things for which Roger Sperry wins the Nobel Prize is back in the day, he worked on the first set of patients where we did surgery for epilepsy. So one of the original surgeries for epilepsy was that if the seizure, let's say, started on the one side of the brain, sometimes it would transfer to the other side of the brain through this huge structure called the corpus callosum. And then when it went on both sides of the brain, the patient was absolutely, destabilized. So a surgery used to be, okay, let's just cut the connection between one side of the brain and the other side of the brain to prevent the seizure from going from one to the other. And so you need to know that fact. And you need to know two other facts. One is, to a first approximation, if I show you something in this eye, it mostly goes to this side of the brain. And if I show you something in this eye, it mostly goes to this side of the brain. So far, so good?
Got it.
And the third thing we need to know is that language, our ability to speak, etc., is here usually on the left side of the brain. Those are the three facts we need to know. So Sperry came up with the most amazing experiment. He would show a patient something in this eye, okay? And when you show it in this eye, it goes to this part of the brain. But that's not the language part of the brain. That's not the part of the brain that produces language. So he would then ask them a question. Patient so-and-so, what did you see, right? Which engages this part of the brain. This part of the brain has no access to the information from this part of the brain because the connections have been cut, right? So in that world, this part of the brain could choose to do anything it wants. It could say, I didn't see anything because it came over to this brain. But 100% of patients, that's not what happened. Instead, what happened is they completely lie. They say, oh yeah, I saw something. It was a boat. It wasn't a boat. It was a lion. And I think what this, because this side knows something happened. This person is asking me a question. Maybe they're getting glimpses of it, but it's not possible for it to confront reality. It has to come up with a narrative that makes sense. And in the absence of any information, we will rather come up with a lie than be forced to say we don't know or we can't predict or the brains can't predict. Please, Ramana.
Well, that makes me think of, I'm sorry, Bobby, isn't that, I wouldn't call it, necessarily a lie, but the brain's doing something similar when it's forecasting the future. So maybe 10 minutes from now versus 10 years from now, it's coming up with its own simulation.
That's fair.
Based on your, finite experiences up to this point.
That's fair. And I think that's an excellent point. All of these parts are doing different things, right? And whatever it's doing, it's still doing the best job that it could do based on what the information is. But the thing that comes out of here, the actual words, are how we determine whether somebody is telling the truth or telling a lie. And I think that's another kind of fascinating thing that's going to be happening when we unlock the circuitry of the brain. We're going to realize that the thing that comes out of here, these words, is maybe not even the full representation of what the whole brain thinks. Maybe it's not even 10% of what that brain thinks. And I think we're going to have to. These are the kinds of things that we're going to get to terms with when we could try to finally physically understand all of the things that are happening in the brain.
Yeah, and what comes out of the mouth doesn't necessarily have to be what's coming directly from the brain, because we have this thing like this free will of thought.
Yeah.
More so than others. So we can learn to control our thoughts and organize them in a manner that what comes out is maybe not the lie, a little bit more calculated than others. And some that don't practice that.
Sure.
This what's coming next, goodness gracious knows.
Right.
So let me ask you, Dr. Kasthuri, that's I'm going to change the topic a little bit about that.
Please.
Is a self illusion is a self. Where is a self-referential system in the brain? How does it is an illusion, or me like Ramana, Susan, and you? We are all identifying where this comes from. Self-referential system in our brain, from the brain.
So first, I think this is again one of the deepest. Deception is not right. I mean, I think illusion is probably right. This is the deepest illusion of the brain, and I think philosophers or brain scientists from hundreds of years ago, or Greeks, I think, probably came up with this. There's a world called the homunculus, and this is, and there was even a Disney movie about this, a Pixar movie or Disney movie about the little girl that has all of the emotions in her head. I forgot the name of the movie, but do you guys know what I'm talking about? Yeah, like anger is an emotion, and but they're individual characters in her head, and they all sit in this like control room where the windows are like the windows of our eyes, and they have gears that, like, when they move this gear, the arm moves like this, and etc. So all of us walk around with this idea that there's a person like us, like sitting right here, controlling there's one unified little Bobby sitting inside my head. But I just told you that the brain is 100 billion neurons and a quadrillion connections scattered throughout the volume of the skull, and they're all connected to each other. So there's no, like, everyone connects to everyone. So is 1,000 of those enough to be me? Is 1,000,000 of those enough to be me? Now, we also know that I can have a stroke, hopefully not, and lose 10 million neurons, maybe 50 million neurons, maybe even a huge chunk of my brain, but I still retain this idea that I'm me. And so it's it's not an obvious number of what fraction of those 100 billion, but I do think the reality of Bobby is spread out over 100 billion neurons and 1 quadrillion connections. And that if you took that same sheet, and in fact, if you spread out all the neurons and in a sheet covering probably the United States, it would still be Bobby. And if they could process the information exactly like they were processing it in my brain, except stretched out over some length scale, that whole United States, that whole surface area should still be me. And should still have the feeling that there's a single person sitting inside the pilot. So I don't think there's an obvious part of the brain that is that it's some emergent property of a brain. I often compare brains to hurricanes because it's kind of this emergent. When you get the right combination of humidity, temperature, wind, boom. This emergent thing, a hurricane or a tornado appears. And you couldn't really say, like, okay, what if I had half the water? Or, it's hard to quantify how much you need to become a hurricane because it's a step function. And I think that's just something similar about brains that way.
It's a very Hindu concept of Maya, right? It's an illusion. It's stunning to me that how much illusion they created around us. That the brain creates that illusion is a fascinating. Do you think it is something? It is mysterious, or what do you think about that? Maya came from a very Hindu religious concept, but it has been there a long time in the ontological and the philosophical area.
I mean, I do, and this is really probably a conversation more for philosophers than neuroscientists. Unfortunately, no. I mean, only unfortunately, given what we know about the brain. Someday it will be a conversation among neuroscientists after we've mapped it and we figured out the physical basis of consciousness. I do find it I do find it fascinating that and there are many philosophers that have suggested this, that I could be behaving exactly the same way, responding the same way, answering the questions exactly the same way, but not have any conscious experience of it, like a zombie, like a robot. Probably to this, maybe even today, there's an AI that was almost indistinguishable from me. It's answering the questions like that, but yet this me, not the AI me, feels like there's a feeling of seeing red and touching something that's beyond just the sensory motor, and why we need that, why that exists, I think is a fundamental question. Is it possible that it's just an accident? That if you, or not an accident, that if you make a brain complicated or sophisticated enough, this is just a kind of byproduct of it and not the purpose of it. I don't know. And I think here, until we have a better understanding of the brain, probably the best answers come from religion and philosophy, and whether it's Hinduism or et cetera. I think those answers have existed for thousands of years because they provide some kind of reassurance or prediction in our lives. Otherwise, it wouldn't have lasted as thousands of years. So I think until we can come up with a better physical explanation, those are the best answers we have.
Bobby, physically, back to the anatomy. You and your colleagues, and mapped completely fly brains and
Yes.
mice brains, and now moving on
not mice yet.
mouse.
And in fact, you asked me this, and I forgot the answer. So we've done the royal colleagues at Princeton and Virginia have mapped the fly brain, which is I would say about 100,000. Maybe this will give you the scale, which is about 100,000 neurons. And so it's pretty small. It's small enough that regular microscopes can image it. I would say there's a fish. The next one was probably going to be a very small fish brain, which is closer to 1 million neurons. Those are all great animals. They're wonderful. I want something I want something like a human, or something that's more sophisticated like a mammal. So then the next one would probably be the mouse brain. And I was saying, so 100,000 and 1 million, but that mouse brain is 100 million neurons. So it's already 100-fold bigger than the fish, and maybe almost 500-fold bigger than the fly. And then the human is another 1,000-fold jump from the mouse. So, please.
Well, I'm trying to think about, okay, let's just say you have the map. Just say it's done of any which animal that you just chose. Is the map the map? They all look the same? I mean, so once you get then my brain's going crazy with, well, now let's layer the chemistry inside of there.
Absolutely.
Let's the hormones and oh my goodness. And so now we have how many different types of maps?
So I think this is a great question. I think the answer is as many as questions we have. And so sometimes, at first, I think everything you're saying is right. First, let's go back to that first point, because I think it's super important. There is no way that the map in my brain is identical to the map in your brain, Susan. It just can't be true. First, because the map in my brain has to compensate for this, and the map in your brain didn't, or maybe you context, but still, I probably have a different kind of eye problem than you, and our brains adapt themselves over development, over life, to these problems. And in fact, I don't know this, but it's probably true that one of my arms is probably slightly different in size or length than the other, or you, or someone else, or your legs. So each of our brains, at minimum, has adapted to our particular bodies, and nobody's body is perfect. So that means we have special brains that have adapted to our imperfect bodies. Second thing we know is that what we experience as children has profound effects on the maps in our brain, as trivially as like what language we learn versus where we grew up. And so there's just absolutely no way that the map in my brain is the same as the map in your brain. Despite that, we share so many things in common. We both see red the same way. We both read English, English, and we speak the same language. So, and to some first approximation, parts of our brain are the same. The part of my brain that starts vision is back here. the part of your brain that starts vision is also back there. So there are many ways that we're similar and many ways that we're not. For example, so often I tell this, brains are like snowflakes. Each one is unique in one sense. But also in another sense, they're kind of the same. Most snowflakes have, I can't remember, 7 arms or whatever.
The key. They have the same key, but then once
Right.
you open the drop-down window on each one.
That's right.
it's gonna be
And we
profoundly
don't know
different.
how much that's going to vary, and we need to know. Because I think one of the issues is in treating mental illnesses is we don't really know what normal and what normal variance looks like and what disease looks like. And it's one of those obstacles in treating this. So really, and I think it's a good point, I'm not talking about doing one brain. I'm saying we got to do enough so that we can understand all of this.
And then you got to do it. I'm sorry, Ramona, because I'm freaking out here. And then you got to do it across the lifespan, right? Because you've got to start with the
Absolutely.
infant and even sooner, pre-birth brain, all the way to post-death brain.
Absolutely
and
right.
Start again.
Yes, and so that's why. But the good news is, if we can make it fast enough and if we can accelerate it, the part that I don't think we're going to have to worry too maybe is that once we collect, because I think there's a question and then you're going to say, okay, but what are you going to do with all of this? How are you going to make sense of this, Bobby, with 50 different chemistry condition, all these ages and diseases? And here, I think the path is pretty clear. Anytime we digitize biology, like the genome or proteins, it's the AI that figures out the rules for us. And I think there's going to be a fundamental shift here that'll be different in previous versions of this, where we will collect these data sets and the AI will say, okay, look, you gave me age 12 and age 17, and I don't really need 13, 14, and 15, but I really need age 2, or I really need schizophrenia, this variation or that variation. So I think once we got this started, it's going to be guided by some combination of human and AI, and that's really where we're going to have some speed ups. But it's not going to be easy. And good news for me, Susan, I'm not going to lose my job for a long time.
Job security. I was thinking that. I'm like, wow.
Kasthuri, I have a very interesting question I wanted to ask you about that. Susan raises cattle, and my children have dogs. Do you think one day we can communicate with them with this neuronal maps that you create, and then we understand their certain basic needs of them? Or do you think we can communicate through the neural brain mapping?
I don't know. So I think the question is, so yes, I think we can communicate better with them. But I don't know, meaning I think if I have a model of a cat's brain or a model of a dog's brain, I will have a better understanding of their basic needs, their basic desires, and I'll be better able to interpret the signals they give us now. I believe they're trying to communicate with us constantly, especially my damn cats. We have 2, Susan. And between the meowing and the coming to you at night and pawing your face, I feel like most of the communication is, hey, lazy, get up and do your job. But I know that they're constantly trying to communicate with me. It's not on their end. And I think we will get better at understanding those communications. But I think the more deep question for me is, do they have a concept of language? Meaning, I just, I guess, watched too many cartoon movies growing up. But there's this, or not growing up with my kids, actually. There's that fish movie, not Finding Dory, but the one before Finding Dory. I can't remember. Where he loses.
Nemo? Just regular Nemo?
Yeah, Finding Nemo.
Right. Yeah.
And there's this great scene at the end, near the end of the movie, where they find these seagulls, and the seagulls can talk.
Mine.
Yeah.
Mine.
But because they don't have a concept of language, they don't know how to abstract or etc. They only have one word, which is mine, which is, of course, makes sense because they're seagulls. And I think that might be closer to the reality than for things like cats and dogs. I do think there's a little sophistication there, but I think for the majority of animals, language is not like an obvious thing that they might have, and a lot of their language might be like olfactory.
Sonar, like the sonar with porpoise and the whales. I think they're closer with whales. And I'll tell you what comes to mind is for you, Bobby, is a pet. I know what I'm getting you for holidays is a pet octopus.
Oh, yeah,
With your 8 brains. I figure that might keep you busy on the weekend.
Yes, this used to be, this is one of the brains that we're so fascinated by. We want to map, just given how exotic or alien it is relative to ours. But I have to say, there's people, and I don't know where I fall on this, and I think the UK has actually banned eating octopus because the idea that they're this smart that that you wouldn't eat a primate, and so if you would need a primate, you should need an octopus probably at some level, they would say. And I don't even know whether they can be, whether it's legit to have them as pets anymore.
I don't know either.
Yeah. So one of your fans, Dr. Kasthuri, is my son, who is a neuroscience. He just studied neuroscience. He's going to join with us, and he has questions about music and neuroscience. Let me introduce you to him.
Great.
Ramesh, welcome to the MedBigs webcast. That's Dr. Kasthuri you're talking about. He wanted to meet him so bad.
Yeah, Ramesh, pleasure to meet you. I'm sorry I'm behind, but it's great to see you.
No worries. Yeah, no worries, man. I've been I actually was just able to join the call not too long ago, but kind of catching up to speed. It seems like what you were discussing was essentially AI interpretation of language and communication.
Yes.
So in that case, I think one of the things I'd be interested about is how will AI be helpful in translating essentially, like if you're listening to a music from a different language, a different country, will there be a point where AI, you might have a headset where AI can translate that directly so you can understand it? Or when it comes to interpretation with various neurodevelopmental disorders for music?
So the second one, so the second one I'm not sure, but the first one I think is a really important question, and it's not just music, but let me see if I'm getting close. One of the things that I think, especially when it comes to language, that people have been interested in for a while is there one universal language of a brain that then gets filtered out into other languages? So let's imagine that the language of the brain, we call it mentalese. Like that's the language all brains speak, all thoughts occur in this language. And then what brains do is take mentalese and turn it into English if you happen to live in the United, turn it into Japanese if you happen to, and then if you are translating, you go from Japanese into mentalese and then out into English. Or it could be that the language inside a Japanese person's brain is Japanese, and the language, sorry, I don't mean a Japanese person's brain. The language inside somebody that mostly speaks Japanese, has always spoke Japanese, is Japanese, because if I grew up in Japan, I would speak Japanese as well as anybody there. So it's not necessarily the person, it's this idea that our thoughts are converted into language. Language thought almost seem to be the same thing. And the question is there a missing layer? Is there a hidden layer that's this universal thought, that all thoughts are in this language called mentalese and then get translated out? I think this is an incredible, does that seem close to your question?
Yeah.
I don't have an answer. It's a great question. I think it's for me, it's a great question. I would say the only kind of close answer I can come to it, and this is just my view of language in general. And let me maybe I could spend 2 minutes telling you about the story about language, and it might answer your question. A separate question that I sometimes think about is, where does language come from? Like, where did it start? And how did it get so complicated? Like the Oxford English Dictionary, 100,000 words at this point. And so it's very parsed out. Like almost every part of life has multiple words that describe it. And it all started with, I don't know, one word, probably mom, or dad or son. Oh, right, or mine, exactly, like the seagull. And so, like, how does it even start? And then, why is there Italian and German? Like, did they all start? Like, how does that happen? And the closest I've ever come to hearing about this is there's a book called On Language by a professor named Steven Pinker, who's thought about language more than certainly I have. And he said the closest answer he's found is every now and then there's a modern, a new language forms. There are old languages and new, but like even modern languages. And the closest, probably he said we have are in the U.S. are languages, in Louisiana, like Creole, or Creole is probably a more advanced version of Pidgin, which is another kind of language. And I think Creole is a combination of three languages: Afrikaner, French, and English. And so he said, in that case, it's clear where the language comes from. Language comes from children. By that, I mean, children are already learning languages. And if they happen to grow up in a community that has all three of these adults speaking French, Afrikaner, and English, they start playing with the words. The children do. And they create their own language called Creole. And then what happens in every case is those children then become adults. Those adults are now in charge of society, and Creole becomes the language of everybody. And so the only thing I could say to answer your question is that there's a moment where I was not aware, and we didn't know language as children. And so one possibility is that's the state that allows perfect translation across any language. That if you really, like, you shouldn't be translating it back to mental, you shouldn't be taking a Japanese song, translating it back to mentalese, and then trying to figure it out in English, because the sentiment, the emotion, maybe we'll never get there. But if we could somehow capture the way children learned languages, that's how I would try to translate it into English, and then actually capture it. I think certainly with age, certainly at my age, even if you translated, syllable for syllable, a Japanese song, I don't know why, but I don't know if I would ever mean as much to me as it did to someone who spoke Japanese, fluently.
So add it to your list, Bobby. We want
Yes.
that. We want that
Yes.
figured out, please.
Yeah, I mean, language, and another thing that I find, amazing is accents. There is an age at which you don't have an accent. If you move to I was saying I was born in India. I moved to the United States when I was 5 or 6 years old. If I have an accent, I think it's a New Jersey accent. It's not but if I moved 5 years later, maybe, or 8 years later, despite the fact that I would have still lived here for 30, almost 40 years, I would have had a thick accent, or at least a more noticeable accent. So what is that? What changed in my brain in those few years that made me easily get rid of an accent, or never have it? And in the other case, it sticks like glue. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
It sounds like the infiniteness of all of those galaxies of stars.
Fair. That's right.
Which ones are turned, and then epigenetics coming into play, nature versus nurture coming into play. And then the type of music Ramesh is listening to these days. I'm not sure if that I might just shut it all right down.
Yeah, the thing about language, and this is how people can appreciate music from different cultures, is before it becomes language to you, it's sound, right?
Yeah, I
And
mean,
so
it's a great question, Ramesh. Whether does music predate language?
I think music and language moved in tandem throughout history
Okay.
because language was created to communicate a message. Music was a way to pass down messages because,
Yeah,
as
right.
music hits multiple parts of the brain. So it's
Right.
easier to remember information when you associate it with, different melodies, rhythms. So with music, this is an interesting case. Like, people with dementia, and I'm sure you probably, aware, but people with dementia, it can be easier for them to remember their favorite song
Yeah.
than trivial information, even if it's as important as like their kids' names. And
Yes. I
so
mean, I think it's something else we don't understand about brains, but we should, is what makes music so compelling to us, and across the spectrum. Music comes in so many different varieties. I don't think it's just sometimes I think, oh, it's just a social construct, right? Like I was taught as a kid to like music or as a baby, and I just associate that there's not a particular something intrinsic about music that resonates. It's not a thing. It's just a learned behavior. The way that I prefer Indian food to because I grew up with it. And then sometimes I think that can't be right. It's so compelling, and it happens across so many dimensions, and it touches like so many parts of our brain, exactly like you're saying. But it just then seems weird. Like what the hell? What the heck does music have to do with survive? Like But again, I think these are the fascinating things about brains.
Let me, let me ask you questions on a little bit different. Have you heard about this neuromorphic chips? This is IBM True North and the Intel Lohiri. These are all they're making waves. You think that these neuromorphic chips can solve this computational problem and the enormous requirement for the power requirements?
Yeah, so that's something I hadn't mentioned, which I should have mentioned at this point. The remarkable thing about brains, beyond everything else we talked about, is that everything brains do, whether you're Einstein or Marie Curie, this is Chicago specific, or Michael Jordan, all brains operate at 20 watts of power. The light bulbs here are probably 60 watts, and so although you've been right your whole life that the people you disagreed with were dim bulbs. That's true. It's just that's 20 watts covers everything. And the idea of neuromorphic computing is that if you copied the architecture of the brain, could you also then compute at 20 watts of power? And that's the general idea. I don't know if any of them have come even close first, but I think they have a hard problem to solve because they not only have to know like which neuron connects to which neuron, etc., but they have to make materials in material science in the real world that respond as fast as our neurons do, etc. So I think there's a two problem there. First, what is the right architecture? What's the right pattern to build these circuits in? And then make it of material that has the same properties that neurons do. They fire electrical signals, milliseconds, etc. And I think it makes it an incredibly challenging field, I would imagine. But again, if you could solve the energy problem for computing, there is a good chance that some point in the future, computing is going to eat all the energy. And by the way, if people weren't aware of it, they wouldn't already be talking about building data centers in space and having to build a new generation of nuclear power plants next to our CPUs and our GPUs, because compute is what is going to destroy. When I grew up, it was cars or pollution, or like that was what was going to destroy the environment and etc. But I think there's a much better case to be made.
Absolutely. It's a much better case to be. Yeah. Can you hear me, Dr. Kasthuri?
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, that's a really major concern, right? This is environmental concerns are there. The requirement for the power is unbelievable. I made a show actually. Can Ramesh have any final question for him? You want to talk?
I guess more of a final statement. I have such a lot of cognitive dissonance about AI, as in, I do think that AI, especially the way that what it takes from the environment, is definitely something that is very concerning and, is pretty harmful to us down the line. But from a neuroscientist perspective, I am always interested to see how we can kind of further understand the brain by, even with artificial mechanisms. So using, even if it was using AI as a tool to understand learning or, language processing, things that we've been, discussing. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with it. But
yeah, man, like most times, I think that most of these moments, it's a thrilling / terrifying moment to be a scientist, neuroscientist, AI. It's on the edge. I feel like some people appreciate it. I don't know how I feel about it most of the time, but I feel like we're here. We could tip either into like a golden age or into something horrible. But it's definitely not boring.
Yeah.
Ramesh, you can apply grant from him. You can apply, as a PhD program with him. That's a
You're
great idea. Susan, you want to say something?
Yeah, well, if it came to tipping, I'm going to tip towards the golden age because I think the
Let's hope
knowledge
so.
is absolutely phenomenal. And I think the job that you and your colleagues around the world are doing this amazing service to mankind. And that's what we want to talk about on this show. And that's why we bring amazing humans like you, is because we want to tip towards golden ripples of magnificence across all of our
Yeah.
brains in the world. And thank you so much for doing that. So I'm on team golden era.
Good. Me too.
And,
I mean, I think that's why we push it here. That's why we push that. We know that, but also, if we weren't on team, what's the point?
Exactly. Exactly. So we just all need to get it together and
Exactly.
and come by and maybe talk about octopus on our next show.
Dr. Kasthuri, really is a wonderful talking with you. It's a really educational, and I'm always waiting for your. One of the things that I became an instant fan of you watching that PBS program, and then you were very articulate about it, and then I know you showed that articulation. We can be evident everywhere. I think you are one of the greatest teachers of neuroscience for all of us. In fact, thank you so much for your participation in Medbricks. You a big thank you for you. And can you wait for a few minutes after the program and we can talk a little bit, all of us together for a few minutes?
Sure.
Sure. Thank you so much. Good night, all of you, and thank you. It's a privilege and honor to have you, Dr. Kasthuri. It's really,
Thank you for having me.
Thank
you for having me.
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you, Ramesh.
Anytime.
Thank you so much. Good night.
We are retelling their stories through our patented designs that can be worn on scrubs, t-shirts, printed on conference bags, and endless other promotional materials. Daily Wear for Medicine is the first ever of its kind to create curiosity in medicine through visual art. We at Medbricks are celebrating unsung heroes of the past who made enormous contributions to the field of medicine through our unique campaign called Daily Wear for Medicine. You can wear it, carry it, and give it.